Happy Friday, everybody. It's the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. I'm Mike Gill. I can't believe it was 10 years ago today the Eagles lost that Super Bowl to the New England Patriots on a weekend where the Patriots are celebrating another Super Bowl. The Eagles, 10 years later, still don't have one. I'm Mike Gill. This is the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN. You know, that Super Bowl 10 years ago could have gone so many different ways. Every Patriots Super Bowl has seemed to be a very close matchup, very close contest. And in that Super Bowl, the Philadelphia Eagles fall to the New England Patriots. I'll ask this question as we look back at 10 years after Super Bowl 39. What actually were the Eagles missing? What were the Eagles missing? You're in that Super Bowl. You're having that close of a game. 10 years ago today, the Eagles lost to the Patriots in Super Bowl. What were the Eagles missing that year? The Eagles would have won that game if, fill in the blank. 609-573-ESPN, 609-573-3776. You know, I don't know that that's really ever been thoroughly discussed in a long, long time, going back 10 years now. The Eagles would have won that Super Bowl if. And I know the answer that typically comes out by the ignorant, and I'm seeing it already pop up at 973 ESPN on Twitter. And the first answer is typically McNabb throwing up, is why they lost that game. I've never heard of such superb sports breakdown. A team lost a game because their quarterback vomited. That is really in-depth. Somebody lost a game because a man lost his lunch. That's really how the Eagles lost the game. We're going to blame McNabb throwing up, as we've got many times at 973. Jake on Twitter, McNabb didn't throw 3 picks, and Andy Reid wasn't a dumb sack of bleep. Well, that was a little bit more vulgar than I thought it was, Jake. But that might be a better reason. Patio tweets at 973, if D-Nab kept his lunch down. What does Donovan McNabb keeping his lunch down have to do with the team winning or losing the game? Seriously.
Hello?
Can anybody answer that question for me? Because, quite frankly,
where are you calling from, Bob?
He did it before. If he hadn't done it before, I could maybe say, you know what? Maybe that had something to do with it. But quite frankly, if you remember his game against Virginia Tech in 1998, Donovan McNabb vomited on the field against the Virginia Tech Hokies.
Yeah, you were the one with the...
And he comes back and throws the game-winning touchdown. So, we don't have a high correlation of vomiting costing you football games. What we do have is some correlation of vomiting winning you a football game. So the vomiting, I think, has to get pushed down the list of reasons why the Eagles lost 10 years ago in the Super Bowl. Got this tweet at 973 ESPN. It says, if the Philadelphia Eagles would have won that Super Bowl, if Philadelphia wasn't cursed. That would probably be a more viable reason than Donovan McNabb throwing up.
973 ESPN.
Michael tweets at us. He says the Philadelphia Eagles would have won that Super Bowl if Ocho Cinco. Actually, I take that back. It's not Ocho Cinco. He's saying if himself played. If he actually played. Because he said, I am better than L.J. Smith. I thought he was saying Ocho Cinco because his Twitter handle was Cinco. I saw that. Sorry. I was a little late. We also had one famous Philadelphia Eagle chime in on Twitter, at Seth Joyner. You may have heard of him. Tweeted at 973 ESPN. And I think Seth Joyner's reasoning for why the Eagles, or how the Eagles could have won that game, is a little bit more spot on than most of the ones I've had. And he says, had the Eagles made defensive adjustments versus multi-tight end set, We had them dead at half. New England adjusted their offense. We couldn't readjust our defense. Period. PG, did you hear what he said? The almighty defense with Brian Dawkins got criticized. I can't believe it. Somebody criticized Brian Dawkins in the defense. Holy mackerel. Thank you, Seth Joyner. You
Joyner's
speak
a
the
defensive player,
truth.
too.
He speaks the truth.
He knows what it takes.
I mean, people just are so programmed to hate McNabb that they can't find any other way the Eagles could have won that game other than blaming McNabb. When, quite frankly, that defense for years and years and years. If you want to ask the question, how come the Eagles don't have a Super Bowl in the Andy Reid era, I think most likely the answer could be because their defense wasn't up for the challenge. They weren't up for the challenge against Arizona. They couldn't get off the field in the third quarter against the New England Patriots. And more than anything, much like the Seattle Seahawks the other day, their defense gave up 10 points in the fourth. The Eagles' defense let them down time and time again. And Eagle fans don't want to admit it because we like style over substance, Dawkins over McNabb.
That's one way to look at it. And there are certainly other ways to look at it, i.e., I mean, McNabb throwing up in that game did not help his image at all.
Doesn't help your image, but you got to throw that. He threw up in other games.
I know,
people
but
don't want to talk about that.
That's what he's
he
remembered
threw
for.
up in other games. He
he's
threw
remembered
up
for.
in the game against the Virginia Tech Hokies and then threw a touchdown pass. So throwing up
So you're gonna point
in
to a
the
game
game has
in college?
no bearing.
You're going to point to a game in college against Virginia Tech against the Super Bowl?
Why would vomiting cause you to lose the game? Give me that answer. If you can explain to me
'Cause you're nervous.
how
You got
why
the
would
yips.
okay? So throwing up in a college game, was he nervous then?
I don't know what is.
So
what he's
why
doing
would
in
throwing
college.
up in a one game equal a touchdown, and throwing up in another game means he's
They're
nervous?
different
It
games,
makes
Mike.
no sense.
They're different games. You really can't say that the two are related.
They're not related, but he did the same act. If he vomited in one spot and he vomited in another, why would one vomit equal one thing and another vomit equal something different?
Because this vomit is in the Super Bowl in the grandest stage of them all.
Well, what? So he still vomited.
And he did it in the fourth quarter, down points.
Same with the game against Virginia Tech, by the way. He threw the game-winning touchdown after he threw up. He then drove them down the field and threw the touchdown as time expired. No one wants to talk about that because apparently vomiting in a college game is completely different than vomiting in a pro football game.
All I know is, going back to that Super Bowl, that drive took almost 4 minutes off the clock late in that game when they threw that touchdown pass to Greg Lewis. I'm looking at it right here. 4 minutes that drive took off the clock. For whatever reason, why they were not in hurry-up mode, I have no idea.
Well, you
And
know,
I think people point to McNabb.
there's a guy on the sideline when McNabb left. I think he had some problems with clock management as well. I think we were complaining about the same things even after the quarterback was gone. If it was only a McNabb instance, then possibly that would be another viable opportunity to make an incorrect judgment on the guy. However, when Andy Reid was here and anybody else was playing quarterback, the same thing happened. I think Reid controlled the offense a lot more than people want to really admit here, and it's an easy out to go to McNabb.
It's tough to say because the game was tied and heading into the fourth quarter. The game was tied. 14 all, I believe. The game was tied, and all of a sudden, New England goes on to win 24-14. That's where the game was lost, and I think a lot of people point to Donovan McNabb and his failure.
Because that's the easy, lazy way to go. It's
It
the
may
easy,
be.
it's the easiest, laziest way to go is
It
to
may
point
be.
to the guy that you like the least and blame him.
Probably.
Nobody wants to say it was Brian Dawkins' fault because we all like Brian Dawkins. And I'm not saying it's Brian Dawkins specifically, but he's the leader of that defense, which nobody ever wants to remember could not get off the field in the third quarter of that game. As Seth Joyner just said, they made the adjustments on offense. The Eagles' defense did not make the adjustments in that game, and therefore, the third quarter was an absolute disaster for the Philadelphia Eagles.
Well, but the game was still tied at that point. They were still in that game.
Absolutely.
And
They were in the game the whole time. I mean, they were virtually,
Until the
that
fourth
game
quarter,
was
right.
was one of the
But that
underrated
drive-
Super Bowl, by the way.
They just didn't hurry up at the worst possible time. They were in slow motion. 4 minutes went off that clock on that 80-yard drive.
Yep.
And they only had 1 minute 48. So they lost a 2-minute warning. I mean, they totally blew it on that drive. I have no idea why. And a lot of people point to McNabb being out of shape. We know about his 2-minute drill woes in Washington, and the guy just did vomit. That happened.
I'm not suggesting he did not vomit. I'm suggesting vomiting has nothing to do with your play.
A lot of people disagree with you.
Well, and a lot of people aren't very bright, and a lot of people aren't very smart. There's a lot of people out there. Look, Wrath of Khan, man, you try to supply to the masses instead of just the few. Wrath of Khan, though, unfortunately, for many, when I try to appeal to the masses, I'm appealing to people who have agendas. I'm appealing to people who don't like Donovan McNabb.
I don't like Donovan McNabb.
Well, and it's
I
very
sat right next to the
it's
gentleman
very
right
apparent. It's very and look, I could say I don't like him, but first off, if he didn't vomit in another competitive atmosphere, I would probably be more inclined to say, you know what, that's a little odd. If number two, I didn't personally know people who were by far and away the best players on the field and vomited every single time we played a competitive event, then I would obviously say that's a little odd. I have seen many times people vomit and get right back out there, much like McNabb did against Virginia Tech. And you can go watch it. I'll find the play, and I'll play it for you when we come back from the break.
But the timing is just terrible.
Of course it is.
Have been worse.
But you got to, again, like it's not black and white. You can't just say this time in this game makes it bad as opposed to this time in this game. It's the same act at different times. You can't say because it's at this time in this game makes it worse than this time in this game.
Yes, I can, because it does make it worse.
Well, that's where you're wrong.
Because it happened in college. I mean, that really has no bearing on
playing. Why would that not have any bearing?
Against Virginia Tech 10 years before.
It's the same act. You're trying to tell me that vomiting in one instance is different than vomiting in another instance.
That's why this topic is such a lightning rod, because I mean the guy just, people hate the guy, and they'll never forgive him.
Because
but it's not just that.
It's an agenda. It's an agenda. It's his personality. No doubt.
It's all that.
Exactly. And you got, again, you're saying all the right things. It's his personality. It's air guitar. It's all of these things that have no bearing as to the way this man played.
I mean, the guy couldn't even get his number retired without getting criticized in that speech during halftime. Was it 2 years ago?
We're not going to like everybody. I mean, I get it. You don't have to like the guy, but like I say, just because you don't like a guy doesn't mean you can't judge him fairly. You got to be able to judge a guy fairly whether you like him or not. You can't sit here and tell me a man vomiting in the Super Bowl and a man vomiting in a college football game are completely two separate entities. It's the same